Here's the cover slide for this assignment. The agenda for this assignment is as follows. I will go through a quick introduction of myself and the class, followed by defining and summarizing both the garbage can and the iron triangle policy models. I will then outline the policy process for each model and then explain how the garbage can policy was used in the federal government's response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks through the USA Patriot Act. My name is Eric Collier. I am completing Lesson Plan 2 Assignment Garbage Can Model for CJ 6100 Law and Public Policy. During Lesson Plan 2, the topic of learning was directed towards criminal justice policies. The ideologies of Americans from across the United States are very different, but yet very interesting in the entire makeup of the U.S.'s policies. A person's ideology is really their values that come from their family, school, religion, civic participation, and political activities. These ideologies are then broken down into liberal and conservative beliefs and also political parties of Democrat and Republicans. These different ideologies drive the policies that are planned, written, voted on, and sometimes signed into law by the president on the federal level, by governors on the state level, and by mayors at the local level. However, even though there are differences in ideologies, policy-making models such as the garbage can and iron triangle are still able to be successful. The garbage can model was described in the context of organizational choice to describe how some policies in government are developed. This model was illustrated by Cohen, March, and Olson to explain organizational choices. The garbage can model is driven by three general properties: problematic preferences, unclear technology, and then fluid participation. These three properties together tend to be explained by the term organized anarchies, because if an outside entity were to try and become a part of the policy-making process, they might think it was completely ridiculous. In essence, the garbage can model can be described as garbage in and garbage out. This means that a bunch of ideas, some good and some bad, some new and some old, are applied to a situation in which a policy or a law is required. In general, it is a policy that has to be groomed to be effective. In the beginning, it is generally a bunch of guidelines and stated rights and restrictions. First, problematic preferences are when an organization or lawmakers operate on preferences that are inconsistent and ambiguous. All of the garbage is inputted into the policy in a manner that it comes out in a coherent policy, which can then be developed and refined in the future. Second, unclear technology is when the process and information isn't clearly understood by those partaking in the process. The members of Congress at any level of government understands that there will be trial and error conducted before the policy can be effective. Third, fluid participation means that contributors come and go as does their devotion at different parts in the policy process. This means that decision makers on the policy change from time to time, depending on their influence needed and their special interests. These three properties of organized anarchy have been identified in the studies of different organizations, and they are applicable to the way that policymakers produce laws in the legislative branch of Congress. One of the underlying behaviors is the choices made without complete consent of the entire body and without shared goals. This process will be covered later in the explanation of how the United and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism, or the U.S. Patriot Act, that was implemented after the attacks of New York City and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. The iron triangle model shows that policymaking is essentially made up of the entities that will wield the most power out of those that make policy. The iron triangle of policymaking is made up of three key players who are the foundation of all policies, and that never changes. These three never change and never bend, which essentially forms the iron triangle. Additionally, some other names include policy whirlpools, cozy little triangles, triple alliances, and power triads. The iron triangle is made up of the executive bureaucracies, the congressional committees, and the special interest groups. These three separate entities have their own agendas, and at certain times they will all have the same agendas and motivations, and then they get together and form policies to be signed into law. The missing components to the process are the three other entities such as public opinion, the media, and the president, which are all assumed to be part of the process. First, the executive bureaucracies are agencies such as the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and the Department of Homeland Security. And these are the entities that should make up crime policy in America because they know more than the public or news media. Next, the congressional committees control which bills are considered by Congress, and they are responsible for drafting legislation. They make up the bureaucracies that will debate or negotiate with interest groups to shape future policies. Lastly, the interest groups have considerable influence due to time, money, and power. The end result of an interest group is to hire lobbyists to influence congressional committee members to develop legislation that is in their best interests. 2017 tax cut bill that was passed in December 2017 relied heavily on the Iron Triangle model to produce a tax bill. This bill relied much on the Iron Triangle, but it also had the endorsement of the president. It had a lot of media coverage, and there was many public opinions that were for it and against it. The Treasury Department is the executive bureaucracy that takes the president's recommendations and drafts the tax law, which is then sent to Congress in a proposed legislation. Then the Committee on Ways and Means, who is responsible for considering all tax legislation, holds hearings and debates that include the Secretary of Treasury, the Director of Office of Management and Budget, and the Senate Finance Committee, and the Congressional Joint Committee on Internal Revenue. Lastly, you have lobbyists who help influence which parts of the bill will benefit their representatives, which is generally done in the way of monetary contributions to groups mentioned above. Back to the USA Patriot Act of 2001. Leading up to 9/11, there were plenty of bills, legislation, ideas, wants and needs, and resources required across all levels of government that perhaps could have prevented the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. However, in most cases, there simply wasn't a centralized idea. In the aftermath of 9/11, lawmakers in Congress wanted to ensure that America was safe from future attacks, and so the before mentioned garbage was put into a garbage can model of policy making, and out came a lot of garbage. The garbage, however, was organized anarchy due to the urgency of all involved, and so Congress drudged through the machinations to pass the USA Patriot Act of 2001. In its original form, the bill offered a number of thoughts on how to keep America safe, problematic preferences. The policymakers did all of this without knowing exactly how they would implement much of the language in the bill, unclear technologies. And since there were a lot of hands in the cookie jar throughout the last 16 and a half years of its existence, the hands have changed over and over throughout the implementation process. Fluid participation. The references used in this assignment are listed above. Mission complete.